realised something.
This is going somewhere, I imagine.
Well, has there ever been a time where you've realised something about a board game and you've thought, well, that's obvious, but the whole time before you thought it was something completely different?
Sure, like in our video about Pampero, right?
Kind of, but not. So,
do you like how I did that?
Yes,
how I plugged our own video in the podcast?
No, not really. I think that's gauche, but whatever. I was specifically talking about, the Azul chocolate set.
Sure, yes.
I thought that was made of chocolate for the longest time. I didn't realise that it was just like the theme was chocolate box.
Right.
I thought it was an actual
chocolate
set. Like, I don't know,
be a
promo thing.
Really expensive either box of chocolate or board game because single use and perishable.
You could play the game, I guess, but then you would eat it, or
don't eat it, and it would just go rancid.
Well,
or melt.
Put it in a museum. So, don't leave it in the back of the car on the hot day. Yeah. But after you realise, you go, "Oh, you duh!" Like, of course, it wasn't really made of chocolate. But do you know what I mean?
Wow, you're a genius. Like,
all right, don't make fun. I'm sharing things here.
Okay,
you've never done that. You've never. Thought something about a game, maybe not quite that odd, but you never thought something about a game that then you've realised, oh wait, no, I was foolish. Obviously, that is not the case.
Did I ever tell the audience the story of how a Plan B marketing rep once told us, like, how Azul has hit it really big, and people have even come up with this thing where it's like, oh, they're like pieces from Starburst. And I'm standing there going, like, how do I not say to him now, yes, we did that. That was us. That was literally our video. We did that in
the video, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, but we weren't the only ones.
But we were the first. But we said it was and then it became Starburst.
No, I don't believe that's true.
Starburst was random, right? It could have been any candy. It's just that we picked Starburst.
I guess, because they're not really the colours of Starburst.
Exactly, right? So it was us.
Maybe.
Yeah, it was definitely
us. I believe you.
And the alligator mask.
Welcome to Talk Cardboard, a podcast about board games and everything adjacent with Elaine and Efka. I see I did both our names this time. Stop fussing about, Elaine. On today's episode, we'll be...
Wow. Thanks.
Well, people know by now that you're sitting with me. It's just quicker. But now this is making it even longer. On today's episode, we'll be doing a whodunit in Chronologic Paris 1920, harnessing kangaroos to make energy in Nucleum Australia, and getting a job at the council in cities.
I'm still on the bit where we get a job at the council. It's like, what kind of hellscape is this?
You're a city planner for the council.
I guess you have to work for the council, right? What if you're a private city planner? Is that a job? Let me know in the emails.
Talking of emails, on the last episode, I asked everyone how they learn a game, how they best learn a game. What do they do, especially if they're going to teach it afterwards? What do they do? So we've had an email from Fuzzy on that topic. Recently at a convention, I played an upcoming game, Number Stations, getting published next year, with the designer. It was certainly an experience, and I attribute a lot of it to the teach. The way they taught the game was so different from what I see in my weekly group. What they did was pretty much set up, then show us the theme and the goal of the game. You get points from these missions and to a lesser extent from actions taken. Then they took the first turn, did the action and explained how it worked, maybe with a little bit of why. Then said to the next player, pick a different action to the one I did, and explained that and maybe touched a little on how taking that action first might shape into a plan, or just suggested what they might look to do in their next turn. It just worked so well. Of course, this is the person who knows the game inside out, so I guess this comment is less about learning a game in order to teach it to others and more about how do you engage newer players to a game you know really well. This is in such contrast to the way we teach games in my group, where we need to know the entirety of every possibility and get complaints if that wasn't covered in the teach. I think we go too far competitive right off the bat. Instead of learning the game, we all want to win the game. Maybe something that also comes up into this is how disappointingly little we replay games that are not recognised as absolute masterpieces. They then elaborate a little bit more, but that is the essence of the email.
Well, the demo teach is such a different beast, and for many reasons, like we don't engage with it. I think because we've had so many bad experiences as reviewers, specifically with demo teachers at conventions. So one of the starkest ones that stands out is First Martians, where we had a demo of that at UK Games Expo. And it just blew us away. It was amazing. It was so much fun. We were like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And then I remember when we were liaising a review copy with the designer and publisher, he confided in me that he's a little bit worried about how that game's going to be received. And I was like, what are you worried about? The game's great, right? And then we were one of the people that panned it, because when we played the actual game, it turns out it's nothing like that, right? So one thing to keep in mind with demo teachers is that they are specifically designed to sell a game. And maybe there is a point to that when you're trying to engage new players with a game to say, like, hey, this is what's cool about that game. But it can also easily be overselling that game. You know, you're like, oh, like, look at all these cool ideas. They don't actually play out, because when you sit down and start playing the game and investing time into it, you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought this was, you know? So I think it's a kind of a, you know, what's the two-sided thing, you know? And you can end up, you know, really inspiring someone to enjoy this game, but maybe kind of lead them down a different path than you intended to.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it was that's a really good point. And you are absolutely right. There is a difference between showcasing a game and knowing that game really well and going, look at these cool bits in it, but kind of maybe ignoring the less interesting or exciting bits of that game. It's a bit like having a trailer for a film. You get all the exciting bits and then you watch the film and go, oh, where are the exciting bits that I've already seen?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because like if you really like a film, you know, and you want to show it to your friends, you don't want to show them the trailer, you want to show them the film, right? You might get them excited by the trailer, but then if like the trailer oversells it, it's like, oh, okay, right?
But I think they have a good point as well with the learning to be competitive in a game. You're not necessarily showing, like, you're right, it's the other side of the coin. Showing people the ways to win. And that's what you teach. You say, well, this is how the game ends. This is how you get the points. This is how you win, right? And there is something there about not fully engaging with everything that's going on in the game and having this linear mindset of, what do I do to do the best? Let's talk about our first game. Chronologic Paris 1920 comes from publisher Ori Games by designers Fabien Gradel and Johan Levet, with art by Arch Apolleur and Jan Villani. I know I said all of that wrong. Let's talk about that.
What about how you said all that wrong?
This is not a podcast about how to pronounce people's names, thankfully.
Well, here's $1 million idea. Let's talk about Kronologic. I guess there's not much to say, really. So this is not a review copy, but it is a copy that is a review copy of someone else that we then borrowed from them, and we're then sending it back to them. So it's not a game we have acquired ourselves, but it isn't a game that was sent to us by a publisher. So I feel like within our remit, that's fine. Anyway, that's
borrowing someone else's game. I think
that's
okay.
The disclosure is over. Okay, so this has like a really simple pitch to it, and I think that pitch could be very appealing to a a certain group of people. I'm making this way longer than it needs to be. It's Cluedo. It's Cluedo without the dice roll or clue. So it's Cluedo but not roll and move, right? But the Chronologic, the chrono of the Chronologic part alludes to like a time element.
But it's spelt with a K.
Wow. But it isn't, I mean, it's not like time travel or something like that. It's just like time progresses.
Like it does in real life.
Yeah, like it does in real life. And that is one of the elements that helps you deduce things,
Yes.
right? So the idea is that you have like 6 characters and 6 locations in an opera house.
In this particular case.
Yeah, in this particular case. And so you get like scenarios. There's, I think, 18 or 15 scenarios.
15. Yeah, I think there's 3 different situations and 5 within those.
Yeah, 5 like difficulties and different setups and stuff like that. Yeah. So there's 15 scenarios. And yeah, you basically pick a scenario and then it says like, find out who killed the detective, right? That's the first scenario, right? And so there's 6 characters. One of them is the detective. And so they're all in this opera house. And there's 6 time zones as well, right? And so there's different rooms in this opera house. And you have to like figure out which character was in what room at what time because you're given a specific goal. So in this case, it's like find out when the detective was with only one other person in a room because that's when they were poisoned. None of this is a spoiler, by the way. It's like the premise of the mission. Yeah. So you're like, oh, okay. So I just need to track where everyone is going because I can't piece out like all the information about one room in a time zone. I get like half the information or whatever, or a third of the information. And then based on that, I have to kind of like, based on the other characters' movements, like I can sort of piece together where everyone was, at what times. And then when I find the crucial bit of information, it's like, oh, the detective was at this time with like only one person in this room. Okay, I know everything I need to know. I can now make my guess. If I'm the first one to guess, I win, right? And then if I guess wrongly, I'm eliminated from the game. And the other players get to keep playing until one of them finds out the correct information. They win, right? It's basically Cluedo. But there is no dice rolling. Elaine, what replaces the dice rolling?
Well, you get there are, like you said, there are 6 characters and there are 6 time zones, and there are also 6 locations. So you're just picking a location, and then you pick either a character or a time zone, and you put the time zone card over the location, and it has little slots in it, so it will reveal certain information depending on which one you've put on that location. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you combine the cards together.
You do.
And like one of them's cardboard, the other one's a card, and the cardboard has like little slits. Yeah. And the card has lots of little details, but most of them are covered up and you can just see the stuff through the slits.
Yeah.
It kind of works like Turing Machine.
Yes. Yeah, like Turing Machine. It is a bit like that.
Just way less complicated.
It's not that game at all, but that mechanism of covering up slots and finding out a certain amount of information. Some of it is shared. So some of it you have to read out and you have to say like, you know, there were 2 characters in this location at 4:00. Whatever, right? But some of it is private information that only you learn, and you can jot down on your. It comes with a really cute like notepad of the opera with a picture of the opera on it, so you can sort of jot down little bits of information for yourself, and you keep it behind a screen. So yeah, that kind of replaces the dice rolling, but there's still cards, you know. Yeah.
Sure, but it's like it's less arduous because I think one of the things about Cluedo that's most annoying, and this is not a particularly deep observation, but it's like you roll a die and like, oh, I wanted to do something on my turn, but I rolled a 2, right? And I don't get to go to this room.
Yeah, that is eliminated completely.
Yeah. So, but in many other essences, this is Cluedo. Right? Like, or it's trying to be Cluedo, and like saying trying to be sounds rude. Sounds rude because like it is. It isn't exactly Cluedo, but like if your family has played Cluedo and you brought out this and you said we can just play this, it's like Cluedo.
How many times have you said Cluedo in this segment?
Because it's Cluedo. I don't know what else to say. It's just Cluedo, right?
Yeah, you're right, though. I think we said when we played it that it would be great to play like with my parents or, that kind of people that don't play a lot of big, heavy games. I think they would enjoy this. My grandma was excellent at Cluedo. So she would have wiped the floor with us, I think, in this.
Maybe. There was a particular element. So we played a few cases of this. There was a particular element of all of them being pretty close to each other. And I don't feel like there's definitely the fun part of this is like receiving information and going, well, what can I learn from that? What can I eliminate? And it's got that sort of like, logic puzzle vibe going to it where you are like, oh, okay, so I know this and I know that. So for that, I can deduce that and that happened, because the way the game is structured is that the characters have to move every turn.
Yes.
And they can only move to adjacent rooms. So you're like, oh, okay, if I know that, like you've told me there are no characters in this room, so everyone from that room must have moved to the other room because there's only 2 exits.
Yeah.
Right? So just by getting information from someone else who had their turn, you go, oh, okay. Like I've actually learned way more from you doing an action than I myself did an action. And that's a kind of a nice moment, but it also, the way the game bounces, it feels like we are learning a lot of the same stuff simultaneously, because even the things that that I don't, I can probably piece together from the things that you've told me that you were like forced to tell me from by the game's rules. So everyone constantly bounces and bobs around the same state. And we were always pretty close of each other within finding out. It would be like, oh yeah, you guessed correctly, but I would have guessed the same thing on the next turn. I just needed one more bit of information, right?
But is that because we're equally smart, Efka?
No, I think the game is structured that way, where like the amount of information provided, because there's not that many variables, right? You are kind of like just about next to each other, so the deduction isn't particularly deep. It's usually like, do I know this yet? No, I don't, because it could be like 50-50, or oh yes I do, and then you just jot it down and then you kind of piece stuff together.
I don't think either of us tried to make a guess without knowing everything, and I don't know if that's something that you could try and do, like, because especially if there were more players, because I think it plays up to 5 or maybe 4, because we were only playing 2 player, there was not that rush to try and discover things as much, or try and make a guess without knowing all the information. But maybe if you're playing with a higher player count, there is, and you would take that punt earlier. But again, if you guess it wrong, you're out the game and you just have to sit there and watch everyone else doing it, because you already know the solution.
Why would you do that? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was not enjoyable, I would say. It was definitely a nice time. It's not something I would rush out to buy. It's not the best deduction game by like a good country mile, but it is like a nice gateway deduction game where like it's just like one step above Cluedo.
We haven't played any of the other in the Chronologic series, so we haven't got anything to compare it to. So I don't know whether this is very similar to the others or very different from those.
I imagine they probably all work around the same premise, but just have a different location and different scenarios. That would make sense to me, as a series. But you're right. No, we haven't. We don't know that. We don't know all of the information.
But we're gonna make a guess anyway. Yeah, you're right. I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't rush out to buy it. Talking about games that we've borrowed from someone else, this segues nicely into the next email because we've spoken a lot about consumerism within this hobby, and one of the things that we have spoken about too is that there aren't really sort of board game libraries that function really well in that you can take it home with you, play it, and take it back.
There are. It depends on where. But there's a member on our Discord from Finland who said, yeah, their local library has lots of current new titles, right? That they get new ones all the time. And you can go take out a board game and take it home and play it as a library loan, which
that's nice. Yeah.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, they exist.
Yeah, they do exist. So it's interesting to hear about more of those because I don't think we have one locally, and certainly any of the libraries I've worked in have not introduced this. So this email is from Nathan. The twin topics of consumerism and sustainability in board games have come up a lot in your discussions over the last while, which I love, and I just wanted to be part of the conversation if I may.
You may.
The crux of the issue seems to be that our innate human desire to experience novelty is smashing up against the unsustainable reality of mass market consumerism. I love trying new games and I have no desires for publishers to stop making them, but at the same time it feels completely irresponsible for board gamers to buy every game that they want to try. There are just way too many games coming out all the time. In an effort to help tackle this issue, my friends and I started a board game rental library that currently serves about half of our hometown in Portland, Oregon, USA. Our members can have 3 to 4 games out at a time and exchange them up to twice a month. This allows folks to experience the novelty of trying new games and getting to explore the latest mechanics while lessening the consumerist aspects of the hobby. So, and they go on to explain a little bit more about how that works. And I just think it's a great idea. And I don't know how it works logistically, but because, you know, a game coming back, does it have all the pieces? Have you got either a member of library staff like that one in Finland, or, you know, do you yourself look through the games and make sure everything is there? What do you do if the pieces aren't there? Like, I don't know how that works, but I still think it's an interesting thing. And I think it's something that I hope that there is more of it in the future. Right?
Yeah. No, that's definitely giving me pause for thought. Like, how would we implement this? Immediately, I want to do this. You know,
Yeah.
I want to have a board game library.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with us is that, like, one of the great things that I think happened to us was last year deciding not to take review copies on anymore.
Yes.
Right. So that's obviously gonna plug a Patreon. Only possible because people support us on Patreon, right? Because it would just be financially ruining, but also only possible because we just sell on most of the copies secondhand, you know. And in my mind, that is kind of semi like something towards sustainability, because not only are we then using those copies to provide some sort of insight, you know, like at least our take, you know. So that's helping people decide and maybe buy less, you know, only buy the things that really interest them. But also, you know, like it's like that copy then goes to someone else, you know, so that's kind of nice, I think, you know, but like making that into a library would be even better.
So I don't know about board games, but, you know, I worked in a library for a long, long time, like 20 years on and off. And one of the most difficult things was when books came back that were ruined and people were not willing to buy a new copy, or like what I don't know if there's any kind of difference between renting a game and a game for purchase, because like in the library we would buy copies of DVDs that were specifically for rent, because you could not have like a home video DVD copy that you would lend out. So we would pay, like if a DVD was say £10 to buy, we would pay like £40 for that same DVD because it was being loaned out. So I guess there's not that differentiation in board games because it doesn't exist. yet. I don't know, but I mean, it's not something that I've come across. But so it's very difficult if that game does come back ruined, that you suddenly go, well, actually, sorry, this is the rental version and it's £300 to replace instead of £50 or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But also, like, the other issue that you immediately run into is that, board games are so much more expensive than books or DVDs.
Yeah.
And also they take up so much more space.
Yes, and have so many more moving parts.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that can be lost or broken.
Yeah, definitely a lot to chew on.
I said for our next game that the kangaroos power the energy. They don't. That was a joke. But Nucleum Australia comes from publisher Board and Dice by designers Simone Luciani and David Turzi. No, I said that wrong. Go and say it for me. Thank you. With art by Andreas Resch, Zbigniew Umgelter and Alexander Zawada. I didn't say any of those right either, did I?
I don't know. I'm not Polish.
No, I know, but the way your face when I say names sometimes. I have to apologise every time for mispronouncing people's names, and I'm very sorry. And I will try. I try and find out the pronunciation, but it's not always possible. And then I forget.
We've covered Nucleum on a bonus episode of the podcast. So this is Nucleum Australia, which is an expansion. But it will serve. We'll cover both, on the main episode, so that because not everyone has access to the bonus episodes. But if you want to, patreon.com/nopunincluded. Nucleum is pretty great. Has a few hitches, I think. It's a heavy Euro game, and now if I had $1 for every time I've been asked what a Euro game is, I would have
$2,
at least $10. I think, Okay. But people ask that question a lot. I'm not going to answer it now. But if you don't know and you want to, I am working on it. I'm working on it. I promise. Right. It's a heavy Euro game. It comes from, like you said, David Turzi and of course Simone Luciani. But the Turzi part is going to be dominant in my kind of evaluation of Nucleum, because there's a lot of parallels to his other work in terms of what I want to critique it for. But it's also immensely enjoyable, I have to say. There are so many things I really, really like about this game, and how it feels, how engrossing it is, and how it hits a lot of the same notes that, really some of my favorite Euro games do, like Terra Mystica, and it's been compared to Bros like a whole number of times. But, games like Great Western Trail, where there's just a lot of moving parts, they all interconnect, and they all kind of make you pause and think and go, well, I don't know if I can do this, but maybe if I just push this little button here, it'll cascade into a bunch of different things, a whole lot of Eurogame bonuses.
Or maybe that button will get stuck.
Yeah, and then I will be very upset with myself for being a fool. So it's fun. It's great. It does all those things that I really like Eurogames for, but also there's other things. So, okay, broad picture. In Nucleum, we covered it a little bit on our video, on the last Pampero video, but you are basically getting energy, which is nuclear energy, right? And then you are transporting that energy via railway lines that you build across the map, and you are spending then that energy to power up cities, which are, I guess, kind of like contracts, but then you also, that hopefully lets you complete contracts, and contracts give you victory points, maybe also various other bonuses, and victory points, right?
You're powering up the places that you have built within that city. So you're not powering up the whole city, just your tile that you've taken off your personal board and put on the big board.
It's a building. Yeah. And powering that up will normally give you stars, and there's this really funky mechanism where you keep going until you have to reset. But like when you reset, it's the number of stars that you have that matters, and you place these stars, then like you place one star on this bracket on this track, and it's kind of like, you know, like that see how strong you are machine where you're trying to hit it with a hammer and like make it go higher, right? But like it as soon as you do it, then immediately comes down again, right? So it's like where you like how hard you hit, you know, it like makes like a little mark, like a high score, and that's where you place your star, and then it comes down again because you lose all your stars.
That's a great analogy,
right? Yeah. So it's like you're building up your entire kind of until you have to reset all your resources and all your things that you have to collect as many stars as you can, so you make that one punch.
Yeah, like winding up your fist to make that punch.
Yeah, and then you go wham, and then like or like, oh no, I hit 0. So yeah.
Whoops.
But what's weird about this track is that it has these like segments, so you can't repeat the same segment again. So you have to hit harder or less hard, right? So that you can like take a space on this track. So
because they will give you points at the end of the game depending on where your stars are.
I know, and the higher you are, like the bigger the multiplier as well. So it very much feels arcadey, you know.
And like, you can get 2 different multipliers for the same endgame scoring tile also, but you have to be within different brackets for it. It's very like complicated in that way, but you can score so many points from one thing by placing stars in the right places.
Yeah, so it definitely like incentivizes you to go for certain things, and like kind of everyone in every game will be mostly vying for similar things, which already puts it kind of like in a weird spot, because Eurogames normally say, hey, one person can do this and one person can do that. And then like, you know, like there are endgame scoring conditions. So you know, you want to go for something similar, but they normally like broad.
Right, but you always have that kind of tension in a Euro where people are going for the same things and you're fighting against them for it.
Yeah, I think so. It depends. It depends on the Euro game, I think, you know. Certainly something like Castles of Burgundy, you can go completely differently than like other players. Whereas here it's like, oh, we're all trying to do the same thing, but maybe in slightly different ways. And so there is that like very Eurogamey element to it. But the map, which is where you build stuff on, right, is very interactive and weird, because much like in Brass, you are creating like networks, like clumps of your things where you've built buildings and then you can only extend from them. But the way the railway lines work that connect these places, like they can belong to multiple players, and like stuff can travel through them anyway for you, even though they're owned by another player. So eventually, like when you start the map, it's very segmented in its own little pockets, and it's very hard to get anything done, right? So you need to have nucleum mines. You have to have a power plant that is able to take that nucleum, and then it can only take so much, so you need to build wind turbines. And if another player built wind turbines near that mine, you have to give them money to use their turbines. and so like there's a lot of these little conditions that are, you know, very specific, and it's hard to get anything done. But then obviously the more people do things, because these railway lines connect everything, whether yours or not yours, the more like this map becomes homogenous and like a blob, and suddenly things are not hard to do anymore. And then you're just flying, you know, because by that point, there is another element as well where you have like these income tracks that you can boost up through the course of the game. So at the beginning, again, money is very hard and you get very little of it. Or workers, which is another currency, is really hard. You get very few of them, right? But then by the end of the game, like you take a reset turn, you're like, I'm swimming in cash and resources and whatnot. So everything becomes much easier, but at the same time, you have to be so much more precise. Because
you hope it becomes easier, unless you get stuck with a resource that you haven't managed to bump up enough. So when you take your reset turn, you suddenly find you've got no money the next turn because you haven't bumped it enough.
That can happen, yeah. And I think Nucleum is one of those games where like the score between a good game and a game that didn't go so well is like a difference of 100 points.
Right, like Pipeline or something like that.
Yeah, well, not as extreme, because that's like, it's a difference between 200 and 1,000, So,
but there are definite extremes of points. You could do very well. You could do very badly. I don't want to say badly, but you know what I mean. You could score not very many points.
yeah, definitely. And you can tell because, like, my first game of Nucleum, I barely punched like above 100. And then yesterday we played that game.
But yeah, how many points did you get yesterday?
241.
And how many did I get, Efka?
143.
You nearly lapped me.
Nearly, yeah.
I thought I so thought you were. I thought, oh no. What an embarrassment, Elaine. No, you didn't.
It's definitely, but there are shades there of a game where like everything just sometimes goes your way, and sometimes it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's miserable.
Yes.
And when it does, it's just like, well, hey, everything's just,
Yeah. Everything
clicking.
falls into place.
Yeah. That was very bad clicking because I tried to do it like with one
click,
and then
click, click.
sec, but this hand isn't clicking.
Why?
I don't know.
Does it normally?
Yes. I can't make it click. This I can.
How strange.
This is so annoying for podcast listeners.
Yeah, it's annoying for me watching, and I can see you doing it. Yeah, no, you're right though. There could be a big difference in points, but the thing that makes this game, and we spoke about this on our bonus episode previously, the thing that makes this game for me is thinking about how you're using your rail tiles. So you can use them in two ways. You can either place them on your own player board in these little slots, and you'll get to do both the actions because they are both. Each tile has two different actions on it, and you get to do both. Or you can put that same rail tile on the main board to become a rail tile, which will stay there forever. And you might get to do both actions depending on where you've placed it, or you might only get to do one of them, or potentially none.
There's a color matching mini game happening. Yeah.
Mini game, yeah. So it depends on where you place it as to what you can do. And sometimes you find yourself thinking, okay, I really want to put this tile down on the main board because first of all, I'm going to get both actions for it. So that's great. But also it's going to extend my network because that's what putting down rail tiles does, is extends your network. So, but I also really need that tile because if I put it on the main board, then I'm not going to be able to do that action ever again, apart from with the like wild tile action, which obviously you don't want to be reliant on that.
But you can buy so many new tiles.
And you know what? In that last game we played, I bought, I think, 10 tiles over the space of maybe 2 or 3 turns, right? Because I had a contract that needed tiles.
You had so many tiles.
I had so many tiles. I think I had nearly 20 tiles at one point. And yet, because I was buying the free ones and the cheap ones because I really just wanted to fulfill that contract and also start building my network, building rail tiles. I didn't actually take the ones that were very useful. So I ended up with the same action about 15 times and didn't have the actions I actually wanted because I had a lot of electrify. Is that what it's called? Electrify or power up or whatever it's called?
Yeah. Something
that
like
action. But I couldn't power anything up because I didn't have the action to build. So I couldn't put anything else out on the way. It was a disaster. That game was a disaster, but never mind, whatever.
The thing that's funny about these tiles is that the way they can interrupt the flow of the game. And it kind of feels strange, but also novel in a way, because so when you place this railway tile on the board, right? So there are different sized spaces for railways, like how many railway links it needs to connect. So sometimes it's just one, you place one railway tile, you connect both ends, both different like cities, and that's it. There's just one tile goes there. But there's also like spaces where 2 or 3 tiles could go until they connect the city. So these tiles kind of interlink together. And so the gist is that you get the actions on the railway tiles when you place them as railways if they match a color, right? But then if they're 2 or 3 long, obviously only one end matches a color. So you get to do one action, but not the other. But then another player places a tile that matches the tile color with your tile, and then they get to do their action on that tile, but then it triggers your action as well. So they do a thing, then you get to do a thing on their turn, then the turn goes back to them, and then if that was the end of their turn, it goes like to another player, right? Like it just the turn structure starts disjointedly bouncing around in a way that feels reminiscent to the gallerist, where it's just like, whose turn is it now? Sorry, you did what? It's my okay, right? So there is that kind of disjointed element, which doesn't bother me, but it does take a second to acclimatize to it, especially when you're playing with more than two players, because it's like, wait, who? Oh, yeah, okay, it's me, right? So it's very fluid in that way.
It's also confusing if you place another tile next to your own tile, so you get to do both those actions because you've matched the color.
Yeah.
So then you've ended up taking multiple turns when you feel like you shouldn't be able to. So then the next player's going, is it my turn yet? Like, have you not finished yet? Like, and it's easy to forget. I think, for me, like the previous games that we've played, there were, and I said this on the other episode of the podcast, there were times when I forgot to do the second action on my tile when I placed it on my own board, because I was like, okay, I've done my action now. Because that's what I'm used to in a game. I do the action, you do the action, like pass the turn.
Yesterday, I had a turn where like I connected, like it was a two-link railway, right? So I had one tile on it already. I placed another tile. So I got 3 actions effectively, where you normally get to. And then that triggered completion of a contract. So I completed that contract. That gave me a technology. I took the technology, which then immediately gave me an instant use of another action, right? So I'm taking suddenly a 4th action on my turn. It just
that was
balloons,
a bit bonkers, right?
you know? It is untamed and
then
wild.
Sometimes you place the tile down, you get one action, that's it.
Yeah.
So there's real swings of doing a lot and not doing a lot. And I think, I mean, that's obviously part of the game, but I think that's something that I struggle with sometimes, of wanting to be able to do something every time. You're very good, I think, at setting yourself up. And I'm, to use a Magic term, I'm a much more aggro player in that I want to be able to do things each turn. Yeah. So I don't necessarily, and also I'm much more likely to go, well, what if I do this? What if I do this? And I get distracted easily, because in this kind of game, there is so much going on. There is so much to think about on each turn that, like, is it better for me to do this now or this now? What can I do? What tiles have I got left? Do I want to do this now? Do I want to do this, next time? And that, it just turns into bees in my head sometimes, and I can't pluck out the right bee. That analogy went too far, but you know what I mean, right? So, and I think
people can't even see your jumper. You're wearing a bee pattern jumper.
I'm wearing a black and yellow striped jumper. That's true. I'll wear it at Essenspiel, so maybe they'll get to see it. But I think you're very good at being able to plan for several turns ahead, and you need to be able to do that in this kind of game.
Complete aside, did you invoke Magic the Gathering? So
okay,
this
sorry.
is on you. Did you know that the terms summoning sickness, flavor text, and Eurogame were invented by the same person?
That's amazing.
Who worked for Wizards of the Coast and was a Magic the Gathering developer. So yeah, I didn't know that, but that's
and also
cool.
the tap symbol you told me.
Yeah, and also the tap symbol,
universal now,
right?
You see it in so many games now that to exhaust. Yeah,
well,
you do.
no, because you can't say tap. Magic the Gathering has that patented
to exhaust. Then, but it's the same symbol. It's the little arrow, the curly arrow.
They try to use a different kind of looking.
All right.
Yeah, okay.
It's like the Aldi version of Marks and Spencer's products or something, where it's what it's supposed to be, but it has a very slightly different name.
I guess I think we're getting across our like broad impressions of how the game feels, and flows, but not so much what you do. But it's really hard to describe Nucleum in that way, apart from you're trying to get points from a deluge of various things that are hard to define. And you are building up a map with buildings that you are then trying to like route power and like power up.
Yeah.
And because the game is so fluid, it's really hard to describe like what it is you do, but you have some standard actions like build a building, you know, so you need money, or, you know, put down a nucleum mine, you know, that requires workers, and so on and on. So I guess that's the best explanation I can give in a podcast, because it's such a visual game. It has a visual flow, and it's not a straightforward flow. It's a very convoluted flow. But like, now that we're on that, I kind of want to seg into some of my criticisms of Nucleum before we go into the Australia part.
I know, we haven't even started talking about that yet.
No, right? So weirdly, it's the same criticisms as Voidfall, right? So first of all, setup. Oh my God. Just absurd. You know, just takes so much time and is so bitty that, like, I know I enjoy Nucleum quite a bit. You know, it's a lot of fun. It hits those high Eurogame notes that a lot of the good Eurogames hit, right? So that's good. You know, it's very interactive. It can be a little bit confrontational, you know, because, you know, there are a lot of contracts, and you know, you kind of want to get the good ones before the other players, and there's a lot of map interactivity. You want to get the spaces that you want before the other players. So, you know, very, very interactive. And so that's fun. But I know might not ring as you know, sound critique to some people, but the setup is so bitty. And every time I'm setting up this game, I am just sitting there and going, is this worth it? You know, like, this is taking so much time. And then once you get through that, you're like, well, okay, you know, I am enjoying I'm really enjoying myself. You know, it's good.
Saying that though, having set up, sorry, just go back to Pampero because it was our last video. Having set up Nucleum and also Pampero took me longer to set up simply because there were so many transistors to place on the board. Nucleum took me less time because once you kind of figured out, okay, you need this amount of tiles and take out this amount of tiles, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, it was simpler in that sense. But I understand what you mean. There is a lot to figure out to put on the board.
The second thing is because so many of the mechanisms are quite novel. I know the game has been compared to Brass. I don't think they're that alike.
Oh, because it's trains and railways.
Yeah, you are connecting things, and you know, you are trying to form networks, and that part of the game is similar. Everything else is completely different.
And you illuminate buildings. You power them up. Illuminate? That's
well, no, right, you flip the tile over. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a Brass-like element as well. So a lot of it is quite novel, right? And the way the rulebook explains the game is quite shoddy. I mean, there's some tried and true criticisms here for the rulebook. It's very poor for referencing, incredibly poor for referencing. But also, like, it spends like not enough time explaining the novel concepts and what the game is trying to do. And so a lot of the stuff, you feel like some of the rules that need specificity are implied, but you're not sure which way it's really going. And it's only until you encounter them that you go, oh, I don't actually know how this works, right? And because a lot of it is quite convoluted, it's hard to remember how these rules work. So even when you learn, you kind of forget. Like, I played 4 games of this knowing that any power plant can process coal. But on the 5th game, I forgot, and I thought it was just the coal power plant that can process coal. And we played the entire game with that in mind, and thinking that we have to, like, route the coal. Like, we both forgot. We both played 4 games before, and we both forgot on the 5th one, but that's how that works. And like, we had that question whether that's how it works, and the rulebook was ever so slightly vague on that, the way it explains how the energized action works. So we misinterpreted it and played one game of this entirely incorrectly, you know, and it kind of, you know, messed up the flow of that game, I think.
Well, I think for the first 2 games, I didn't remember, and I know you did tell me, that you could place a rail tile anywhere. It didn't have to be in your network.
Right.
You can just start a new network by... I didn't remember that. So I was like trying to eke out this, you were playing network.
Brass.
Yeah, I was pretty much playing Brass. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right. There is a lot of little bits that maybe aren't covered that well. But what it does have, what the rulebook does have, is a list of what all the contract tiles do, which I appreciate. And also you get a little player aid that tells you what your own special abilities do when they're activated. So I appreciate that too.
My final sort of criticism is that so much of how well you're going to do depends on what contracts come out. And that's a David Turci staple, because my exact same criticism for Voidfall, I don't think I actually voiced that in the video, but the contracts are so varied and so specific, but also so powerful.
They can be, yeah.
Right?
They can be.
That you are, like, they're not called contracts, they're called agendas in Voidfall. But, like, if the contracts come out that complement your strategy, you are going to do so much better than if they don't. But because there's a lot of them, they might not be there, and you don't even know that they're not there. Like, in Voidfall, at least, like, all the agendas are possible in any given game, right? Here, half of the contracts are not even present in any given game, which I appreciate adds so much variability, right? But also because they let you change so many things. If the right ones come out, like, yes, in yesterday's game, I was just swimming through contracts.
And the contracts that came out, I was like, I can't do any of these. I am nowhere near doing any of these. Or the reward that you get for doing the contract, I've already got.
Whereas I'm like, oh, like, a new contract comes out, I auto-complete that if I take it. So I'll take it. Oh, I've completed that contract on the same turn.
And you get the bonus for putting the contract down as well. So
I played the faction that got like a star for putting the contract down.
No, I mean, sorry, the 4 different spaces as well. Like you, when you put the contract, you get like a man back, or you get stars, or you get money, or you get a Nucleum cube.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so if you want that bonus again, you want to clear that space. Yeah. So if you can complete it in one turn, it's amazing. So I completed that contract, and I'm like, let's see what the next contract is. And then it comes out, oh, I would auto-complete that as well. Okay, next turn I'll take that one,
Yeah.
It just kind of fuels itself. And I feel like, it's not that luck is a factor. It's like a weird element of luck where, like, one player is just having a great time because all the right things are coming out.
Going, well, that's another 6 points for me. Like this. What?
Yeah, right? Like,
autocomplete, done.
It felt so rude. At one point, I was like, maybe I just shouldn't take that contract because I feel bad now.
No, that's silly.
But, no, it's not, because it's like, you feel like you're just gloating now, Like, you don't want to bring the mood of the entire table down.
Fault.
No, but then if I don't take that contract, because it's not good for the other player or players, right? Like, they're not going to take it. So I might as well take it.
Or
right?
they might take it so that you can't, because it's good for you.
Sure, yeah, but then they're stuck with that contract that they can't complete. Anyway, yeah, it was weird experiencing that. And it wasn't the only time. Like, we played with someone else as well, where, like, they were having the same train ride, like roller coaster ride, which is just like, oh, I complete another contract, I take this car, oh, I complete another contract, right? and I'm just sitting there going, oh, why can't I do that? Right? Like, yeah. So it seems to fuel a lot in terms of how well you're gonna do in the game, and like, either the right ones just come out or they just don't. Anywho, it's not big things. I think the game is still very much enjoyable. It is something that gives me pause whether I want to keep playing it. But, like, I've played quite a few games of this now, and not a single one of them was like not enjoyable. I've had a great time. Anywho, these are small things. None of the games that I've played were not enjoyable. I had a great time throughout all of them. But they are things that make me go like, I've played a lot of games of this, and I just don't know if I want to keep playing it after that because is this game great? Yes. But is the investment of time in the setup and the variability in scores, does it make me want to keep returning to it? I don't know. Enter an expansion, right? So this is Australia, and it is, for a smaller box expansion, adding quite a bit already. There's a whole new map, right? So we're no longer in Germany / Czechia / other nearby things, but we're in Australia, and new map, nice, exciting, like a different layout, right? Different connectivity, different puzzle, already interesting. But on top of that, there's like new mechanisms as well, right? Well, yes, sea, right? So you have ships, so a new type of transport link, and also coal mines. So we went from, we're abandoning coal for nuclear energy to, but maybe some coal as well, right? So that was weird. But also, like, it's a very strange map. So what shipping lines do, right, is that the way one of the game's mechanisms work is that whenever you want to power something, right, you first need to trace a line where you're transporting like coal and or nucleum to a power plant, and you transport it via rail lines. And then from that power plant, you need to transfer like nominal energy. Like it's in the ether, right? Like there's no resource for it, but you count up how much energy that power plant produced, and you transfer that energy back via the railway lines to the building that you want to power. And so you need to be able to connect all of that through various railways that have been built by all players, right? And then you get to power that building and get your, victory points, stars, all of that, right? So the way that the sea works is that you can transport the actual resources, so like coal and nucleum, to the power plant via sea lines. But energy and water don't live well together. So you can't transport the energy back. So then to kind of further accentuate that, there's places like Tasmania. How do you know it's Tasmania? There's a little Tasmanian devil picture.
There is.
I think that's what that is. I think it's a Tasmanian devil. If I'm wrong, please correct me. So, it's like an isolated island place on the side of the map. So it has a couple of locations and a power plant of its own. So what that means is that you can route the resources to that power plant, but then it'll only be able to power
the buildings in Tasmania.
Yeah, and nowhere else, because the power can't leave, right? But also, like, it provides connectivity for the other areas of the map. And so, but only if you build ships on those shipping lines, so then you can power energy through them, but not through other players' ships.
Yeah. Which
is, again, different from how the railway works. So the railway was already pretty convoluted, because it's like this weird multi-step process of like, I get the resources, then I transfer them to the power plant. And this is all in your head. You just have to draw lines on the map. And then I make the energy, then I transfer that energy to the building. So there's some convolution
The
there
only
already.
thing that's physical is the green uranium cubes.
Yes, exactly, right? So you can take a cube if you're using it. It will help you trace a line, I guess. But here things get kludgier and less clear. On top of that, you have these coal mines, which provide you with one free energy for any energized action, as long as that coal mine is within the network of where you want to route things. So that's slightly different because before, coal was very expensive. You had to like pay money every time you wanted to use coal. And the first couple of times players used it, it was only $1, but then like it flipped to $2 and then it flipped to $3, right? $3 for one energy is a lot of money. Way, way, way too much money. So the game incentivized you to use nuclear energy. But now it's like, oh, there's these coal mines that cost me like one worker to build, and then I get a permanent 1 energy bonus for all my energize actions. That seems great. Let's use coal, right?
But they're quite few and far between.
Yeah, there's not many of them.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it has to be within the network of things that you're doing. And using the word network of things is kind of vague because it implies your network, but again, that's not the case. So you can see that there's a lot of convolution, and Australia adds way more convolution, way more convolution. And it is an expansion that kind of doubles down on the game's weaknesses, where it's like it was a weird game to begin with and a convoluted one, so it's making it more convoluted.
Why do you see that as a weakness?
Well, because, like, okay, it's not necessarily a weakness, but it's not, I guess it's not one of the game's strengths, is what I would put, right?
I see.
You know, it's definitely a fun game. It's fun to work out these puzzles of connectivity, right? But at the same time, it's making it more opaque to other people, you know? And so Australia makes it opaquer, right? But the things that were fuzzy in Australia, in Nucleum, right? Like the random nature of contracts and all of that. There's more contracts now, right? So it's even higher variability in terms of like what can come out and, whether you'll get the things that propel you through the game or not. That was my impression of it. What was yours?
Oh, this game slapped me in the face completely. Like the Australia expansion. I didn't know what I was doing. I found it really hard it seems such a simple concept. Like the boats can carry the uranium, but they can't carry energy. Easy, right? But I couldn't, for some reason, figure out how that worked in practice. I could not get my head around whether I could power this building or not, depending on where it was. So I already struggle a little bit with the amount of things that there are to keep track of in Nucleum. And having that one extra one tipped my little brain boat right over, honestly. And I think, aside from, it was the same game where the contracts were coming out that I literally could not do because, like, for example, there was build mines in different coloured cities. I had already built mines in purple cities, so I had no mines to build in other coloured cities. So apart from that, so the rest of the game was just a mishmash of mistakes for me, I think. And not the game's fault at all. I just played very poorly. I started a networking. I think. Okay, so I put pause in that for a second. The map is very, very different, and I think the map is more segmented than the other map, than the Germany map. So if you start building in one place, you can easily be blocked off, or more easily be blocked off from expanding your network out of there if someone builds their railway lines to connect with your city. Which means you can still transport the energy, but you can't expand your network from that point. And there was Tasmania, which was, its own little island, and there was this area that I started building in, and then I thought, oh no, because in order to get a rail link into that city, not into the city, into the power plant, you had to pay extra to put a railway tile down, and then to put wind turbines there was extra money. And I think I just, it was one thing after another, and I spent the wrong tiles as well, it just came crashing down on me, I think.
It's strange that, and again, I keep coming back to contracts, but like some of the contracts that got added to this game felt like they even incentivized further these like weird niche traps, like Tasmania, like, oh, you get a contract for having 2 buildings in Tasmania. In a 2-player game, how many buildings can go into Tasmania? 2, right? Which means it incentivizes you go like invest into going into this area, right? Which might sound nice, but like maybe it doesn't allow you to build the buildings that you want to build, and that's not necessarily good. But then you take this contract and you go, well, I don't know. I guess I don't want to take another contract. So you took this contract and you go, well, I might as well go build in Tasmania now. And you build in Tasmania and you invest these resources into like building up this infrastructure, and there's nothing else to do there, right? And you're like, exactly. Oh, I guess I completed this one contract. Whereas other contracts exist that like, just they further propel things that you want to be doing anyway. Like, oh, like here's a contract that asks you to complete more contracts. Well, that's naturally what I want to do in the game already. I guess that's good, right? Why would you not
take that?
Yeah, why would you not take that, right? And so it makes it easier for people who are not, as familiar with the game to kind of put themselves into traps and just have a bad time.
I think so.
And it's weird how much of the game rides on that one element of contract. But I think a lot of David Turci's games ride, and I recognize it's, he's not the only designer in the game, but it's such a staple of his designs. I can think of Anachrony doing the same thing. I can think of Voidfall doing the same thing. Like these are very important elements in his game. These like scoring contracts, and there's a lot of them. And whether the right ones come out or don't, like a lot of people's strategies hinge on that, and not just strategies. Kind of the entire flow of the game hinges on that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I enjoyed Australia that much. It was certainly nice to explore a different map and kind of be presented with a more complicated challenge. Although I think the map and learning the map and understanding the map is already quite opaque in base game Nucleum. So this feels like a strange first expansion, considering a second one's coming out already.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, here's things that make this game that's already quite convoluted, more convoluted and more full of pitfalls,
But I said to you, like, I think if you have played Nucleum loads of times and you are looking for something a bit more, then I think this is great. Like, if you are so very familiar with all the different things that happen in Nucleum and you found your strategy and you've can bob and weave, to do the things that you need to be able to do to win this game, then and you're looking for more challenging puzzles to complete, then I think this is great because the map is more complicated. It's more difficult to kind of build in the right areas. It presents the extra challenge of the boats and how they transport energy or don't transport energy. And it presents the third complication of the coal mines that you have, right? So do you want to, like, it gives you more paths to go into. So I think this is great if you really like Nucleum, but you feel you've played it so much that you're a little bored of it. Do you know what I mean? And you're looking for something else. I think this is a great expansion for that.
I mean, I'm a sucker for maps. I'll get Concordia maps, even though they don't introduce any new game elements. It's just, it's a different layout. Cool. Sign me up, And then when there is a map with a new game element, I'm like, yeah. So I get it. It's fun. I'm not saying it's not fun. And I don't want to sound too critical. I know I've been fairly critical now. But again, I'm kind of nitpicking at the game rather than, criticizing the game because again, overall, I think this is broadly pretty fun.
Yeah, me too.
And as long as you can kind of handle the weight of this sort of experience that Nucleum offers, Nucleum is great. Nucleum Australia still probably pretty great because as I say, like it kind of doubles down on the weaknesses, but it's still like it's that crunchy puzzle, and it's more of that crunchy puzzle. So if you are craving for more crunch, Nucleum, great. Australia, somewhere down the line, also probably great, but definitely not essential in any way. Only for people who already played the base game to death.
Before we move on to our last game, we've had an email from Pio. They say, Folks seem to be starting their emails with a plethora of thanks for the podcast and reviews. But let me add thank you for the NPI Discord community. It's a safe, welcoming place to chat games and other topics. If you don't support NPI on Patreon, do it now so that you can get in on that discussion. Thank you so much. I wanted to read that out because that's really nice. They go on to say, now that my shilling for NPI is over, I wanted to say I disagree with Efka's comment on if Wilmot's Warehouse doesn't sound fun to you, you probably won't enjoy it. Well, I definitely didn't think I would like it, but I love CMYK stuff and thought my gaming group would enjoy it. Surprised to find I absolutely adore it. To me, it is almost more like a storytelling role-playing game than anything else, much like how Efka compared it to Once Upon a Time. The thing that I don't think was mentioned is that Wilmot's Warehouse gamifies the act of creating a memory palace, like Sherlock Holmes' Cumberbatch version. It works astonishingly well. I take a picture of the board at the end of the game because I like to sit down a week or more later and see if I can lay out previous games. So far, an incredibly high success rate and my memory is junk. 13 years in and I can just about get most of my spouse's phone number right. Give it a shot. Thanks again and keep up the great work. Tell your dogs we love them.
Well, thank you for reminding me of Stephen Moffat's Sherlock. I appreciate that. No, yeah, I that's one of the things I really appreciate about this game, that hacking your brain element. It feels incredibly novel in terms of like a video game adaptation, not doing any of the mechanisms, but doing that sort of natural evocation of storytelling that happens through the mechanisms. Like the mechanisms lead you toward that, but then it happens organically. So they took that notion and injected it into an entirely different system and on tabletop. And it's that notion that carries over, right? Rather than anything else. I find that incredibly fascinating. And I love that game just for that, you know. But you're right. I think anyone who is into that idea of a collaborative storytelling game like Once Upon a Time will enjoy it. I don't know if you are not, that you will, you know.
It also reminds me of, what was the name of that game? It was called like Dreams or something, where you had to recount.
When I Dream?
When I Dream, yeah, there we go. It reminds me of that too, in that you are trying to remember each element, but it's not in a story necessarily, but your brain can make a story in order to remember those elements.
Because the story is absurd.
Because it's absurd,
yeah. But When I Dream was not as good, because When I Dream was chaos. It was just... like, I have to string random things together. And it didn't feel as fun because you're the only one doing it and other people are listening to you.
It wasn't collaborative in that way, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this does it so much better because you're all equally invested in this nonsense working. And so you're kind of like working together to make the nonsense work in everyone's heads. Because if it doesn't, you all lose, right? Well, you don't lose, but you score less points, right? But that's the gist of it, right? Like you are more invested in achieving the cohesion of nonsense
in a fun way.
In a fun way, right? Yeah, no, I think I stand by my words. You have to be into that. If you're not into that, there's no way you're going to enjoy this game.
Our last game of this episode is Cities, which comes from publisher De Vere by designers Steve Finn and Phil Walker-Harding, with art by Jorge Tabanera Redondo.
I want to apologize immediately to De Vere for once again not liking one of their games.
Are you putting the cart before the horse there, Efka?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with Cities, and maybe this is just, I'm going to be very straightforward here. Maybe this is just us being reviewers and having seen too many of that sort of thing. But it very much felt like, once again, it's that sort of thing. There isn't a lot that feels particularly novel about Cities. And maybe that's a fault with us, because I think you feel the same way as I do. You're not particularly jazzed about Cities.
So there was something that I did find quite novel, which we can come back to if
yeah,
you
of
have
course.
a point there.
Love to hear it. But yeah, no, I just felt like, okay, I've been on this carousel ride before and it's not going very fast. That was my impression of it. Um, but basically, Cities is a city building game.
You get on the roller coaster and you find it's like the kiddie roller coaster and it's going very, very slowly. Is that what you mean?
I guess, yeah. That is kind of what I mean. So I think maybe that's a fault with us being enthusiasts and you know, kind of not appreciating the finer details of a simple, elegant design, because it's definitely simple, it's definitely elegant, and there's definitely nothing wrong with it. But okay, you tilted your head as if to say, yes, there is. So now I'm curious.
Okay, so you haven't explained the game yet, right?
No,
but
yeah.
so the thing that I find novel is also the thing that I have the problem with.
Oh, okay. Well, here's a, you know, like plot hook, narrative hook. There we go. That we can come back to later. But yeah, okay. So, city building game, you have a grid that you are expanding. The grid doesn't exist yet, but you take these tiles that have like features on them, and then you build a 3x3 grid eventually by the end of the game. And taking these tiles is one of the things that you can do. You can also take things that you put onto these tiles. So they are various buildings and of different colors. And so some spaces will let you place those buildings onto the tiles that you took. And based on the color of those spaces, that's the color of buildings that you can take. And there's a smorgasbord of colors of buildings, and you take a clump that's randomly distributed at the beginning of every game. So there could be like, oh, all 3 of these buildings are green. I'll take all the green ones if that's where I want to do what I want to do, and you know that's what I need. Or it could be like red, blue, green, right? And like, oh, I could really do with the red and a blue building, but I don't want the green one, but I have to take it, right? So like the buildings come out in clumps, right? And there's also special features like little fountains or like water, like park features or water features. And there's a set collection element where you want different ones like in the same sort of area of park or water, because you know, like I said, the tiles that you take, they have multiple features. Some are building spaces, some are park spaces, some are water spaces, and then finally the fourth thing you can take is like cards with scoring conditions. So you don't score points for like almost anything in the game, but you take these cards and they say, oh, you want like you'll score extra points for every stack of buildings that is only 2 buildings tall, right? And here's another element I forgot to mention, is that you can stack the buildings that you get on top of each other. So for example, if you don't have a new space to put a blue building, you can stack that on an existing clump of blue buildings, making it go higher. But that might be good and or bad, because every building you take, if you can't place it, you have to place it, right? So if you want stacks that are free high, or no, you don't
I think you don't have to place it, but then it's discarded from the game.
Yeah, then you waste it, right? Yeah, so like you want to, you know, kind of stack them at exactly the right height, and maybe sometimes you want to set yourself up so you left that space so that if new buildings come out, like and you're kind of like taking you want to those buildings, you want to get maximum stuff out of that action, right?
Yeah, so that's what I quite like about it, and what I thought was quite novel about it. In a 2-player game, you have 8 meeples each, and there are 4 actions, and you are obligated to take 2 of each action. In a 4-player game, I think you have are obligated to take 1 of each action, and that I quite like, because I quite like a game that tells you this is the restriction, do something useful with it. And I kind of felt that here, where you know that you're going to be able to take all the actions. You have to take all the actions, but in which order are you going to take them? Are you know, is there something that you really need, so you're going to go there first, and then what do you do with the rest of these meeples? Or do you leave that and the other player might steal that thing from you?
There's quite a tension
there is
right?
A little bit of tension there, but on the other side of that, so I thought that was quite novel, right? That this is the restriction, do the thing well. on the other side of that is that there is always going to be something left over that you are going to have to take, that the game kind of auto plays itself at points, because there is no decision to be made anymore. You have one meeple left, and there is only one or two meeples left even, and there are only these places that you can place them. So that kind of was a little bit like, oh, okay, we're at that point again. Oh, I have to take this. My other issue with it a little bit, and this isn't the gameplay, it's more a production thing, is that there are 4 colours in this game of towers that you are building: red, blue, green and yellow. There is nothing else to differentiate what is red or blue or green or yellow. They look identical otherwise. So if you have some kind of colour vision difference, maybe this would be something that you would struggle with, because they are important, because you want a tower that is a certain height of the same colour. So that might be something that you would have to keep asking the other players, what are the colours of these? Do I want to take these or not? I don't know if that is the case, because I don't have colour vision difference, but it's just something that I feel like more designers think about that kind of thing now, rightfully. And I don't know why it wasn't in this game.
Because it's both red and green.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, well spotted. Yeah, I think I have like another kind of speculative criticism of this, where like we only play this as a 2-player game. And so my part here is speculative in terms of a 4-player experience. But I've played so many games like this. I feel like I know exactly how this is going to play out. That in a 4-player game, because it's so opportunistic and you want to get the stuff, you know, like when you get it, you to be exactly as good as you want it to be, right? So it feels like it would become way too unpredictable and too chaotic in terms of like, I can get one thing that I like, you know, and then the rest of it I just have to somehow deal with. And to me, that I feel like, because it's so sparse, I'd much rather play something like Calico, where that hit, you know, happens from turn to turn and is more dynamic. You know, where like, because it kind of nears that sort of game territory where it is like Calico, where you're filling something up and the options become limited. So you
more
want to
restricted.
more restricted. So you want to get the right thing at the right time.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, something like Calico is simpler and more dynamic and more interesting simultaneously. Also, another game that does this, by one of the same co-designers of this game, Phil Walker Harding, co-designed with Matthew Dunstan, My Shelfie, which is a very silly title and premise, but it is like filling up a Calyx shelf, it's shelving unit with various things in patterns. I found that, again, maybe even simpler but more enjoyable. You know, this had, you know, that, you know, like very novel concept of being a city building game. More of those don't exist in board games, so it's nice to have that. But in a way that made it less interesting than other city building games. Simpler, yes, but it felt like the same puzzle that, like, oh, like my options become constricted, and eventually I run out of them and the game ends. Like, we've seen that design over the last 3 or 4 years so many times, but not as interesting as the other ones. Harmony springs to mind. You know, again, very similar beats, more interesting game. But yeah, didn't do anything for me.
No, me neither. What I guess I did like was that you know exactly when the game is going to end. There's no surprise. So it's not like someone does something and, oh no, this game will end at the end of this round or something because they've triggered the end game. It's once you have this 3x3 grid, that is when the game ends, and you know exactly when that is going to happen.
Yeah.
So that I appreciate about it, but within the game, it just wasn't that interesting.
No, because like you said, you end up seeing what the last 2 actions are going to be. You're like, well, I know I have to take this because I haven't taken that action yet. And there's only one thing left, so I'll have to take that. And also, on this other side, I haven't taken this other thing, But there's only one thing left there. So I will have to take that. So my last 2 turns, I guess, don't matter.
And not only that, you know exactly what the other player is going to do too.
Yeah.
It just took some excitement out of it, really.
Yeah, right. The game by the end of the round does devolve into going through the motions. Thankfully, unlike say an 18xx game where the last hour is just going through the motions.
That's true. It's quick.
It's quick. So, not particularly offensive in any way, fine, but didn't spark joy.
I also really, really like the artwork on the cover of this.
The cover is great.
It's so pleasing to me because it's like a Where's Wally kind of picture where there's so much going on. There's just such tiny details everywhere. I love it. I really wanted to like this just for that, but it did not hit the mark. It did not spark that joy. That is the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening and for sending us your comments. If you have anything to say about this or previous episodes, please let us know. Elaine@nopunincluded.com. Efka, what is on the bonus this week and how can people find it?
Well, I think we mentioned 5 times in this episode that there are bonus episodes on our Patreon. So patreon.com/nopunincluded. If you become a paid supporter of this ridiculous venture, you will get a bonus episode every time a main episode comes out. We have 2 games on this bonus episode. The first one is Foundations Metropolis, another city building game. It's a rendition of Foundations of Rome, which was a $200 Kickstarter game that is about as light as cities. And because of its price, it was broadly inaccessible until they made this less absurd, less miniature version of this light game called Foundations Metropolis.
Foundations of Metropolis.
Is it of Metropolis? Okay, Foundations of Metropolis. We'll talk about that. And of course, if you want to finally find out what Foundations of Rome, or in this case, Foundations of Metropolis is like, you have to pay us money. So you have to pay money somewhere, right? Like...
The game is cheaper, but to access our thoughts on it, you must pay.
The second game is a solo game called Conservus. I have some thoughts.
Oh.
You haven't played this.
No, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this.
I have thoughts. So those are there on the bonus episode. And the game of the episode is Nucleum Australia. I think just Nucleum. Let's just say Nucleum is the game of the episode.
That's cheating, but okay.
Yeah?
I'll accept.
Okay. All right. And with that, why don't you say goodbye, Elaine?
Goodbye, Elaine.
Goodbye, Elaine.